I mean, the burning alive is not great. In
the South Boston Irish Catholic version, everybody ends up in hell.
This is just how concise an Italian and Irishman can be. Doesn't get more concise than this.
Good with concision. But we also don't make boring conversations.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the series of 100 videos for 100 cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy. As we get closer and closer to the summit of this mountain of a work, I have recruited the help of heavier and heavier weights in the literary pantheon. And so it's my privilege and my joy to introduce a very well-known face in BookTube, Steve Donoghue.
Hello, BookTube.
Thanks, Steve, for joining, and thank you for accepting to give me a help with this Canto 20 of Paradiso that we're going to chat about today. My question is, out of the few themes that this canto touches on, is there one that hits you or strikes you most? Is there some kind of title that you would give to this canto in particular because of, you know, what it reminds you of, what hits you personally?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on here. We haven't talked about the Divine Comedy in a long time, so allow me to officially congratulate you on having reached paradise, which I don't necessarily equate with having me for a guest. But I don't know how, when it comes to thematic obsessions of this canto, I don't know how deep you want to jump off the deck on. I think it's sort of interesting. I might have twisted your arm a little, but it's sort of apropos that I would be invited for this particular canto in light of a couple of the main guest stars in the thing. There are a couple of guest stars that touch on my own reading passions very, very deeply. And they are on a kind of surface level interest for me in terms of analysis. You have not only a character from Virgil's Aeneid, and I went to high school with Virgil, but you also have the Roman emperor that I have studied more than any other, the Roman Emperor Trajan, who I know as much about as there is to know, and including all of the posthumous legends and mythology that grew up around him that Dante is drawing on in order to have him show up in paradise. What is a thoroughgoing pagan doing in paradise? Either one of them.
Fabulous.
You've got Virgil and Trajan in this thing.
Is there a particular reason why you went so deep in the study of Trajan compared to other emperors?
I find it fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. He was that rarest of things. He was a restorative imperial figure. We ordinarily expect, you know, the thumbnail description of, for instance, the ancient Romans themselves is that they get more and more and more debauched with almost no restorative figures. Robert Graves tried to say that Claudius was a restorative figure. That's just nonsense. Usually it's just stoppering down and down and down. And typically you have figures like Vespasian, for instance, who was viewed as someone who ended a year of incredible civil turmoil and ruled in a stable fashion for a decade. And Trajan was the same way, where you have a madman ruling the empire despotically, utterly, comically despotically. Then he is bumped off, and the best that the Senate can do is put forward, well, a doddering kind of Joe Biden figure. And you think
you compensation.
Right, you think you're looking at a machinery that is poised to fall into the next set of strong hands that grabs it. And it just so happens that the next set of strong hands that grabs it are virtuous. It's a virtuous man. That is amazing. That is an amazing story. So that drew me in long before I knew any of the posthumous mythology about Trajan.
Yeah. So really, we could say that the legends that circulated in the Middle Ages about Trajan, whether completely true or completely false, but they had this kernel of truth, which was Trajan's reputation as a virtuous emperor, as somebody who, at least when compared to his colleagues, especially his predecessor, was, you know, following a pretty solid ethics and trying to be a virtuous man.
Well, mainly I think Dante is mainly obsessed with the civic side of it. He's obsessed with the idea of justice.
Oh, yes.
And Ripheus, the Trojan character, is well, the only thing we know about him is that he was just. And Trajan the same way. But before we get into the weeds on this, should we tell your readers what we're talking about, your viewers what we're talking about? They hear something about an eagle and they're all going, what's going on here?
Great idea.
Should we give them a slightly broader context?
Yeah, great idea. So we are still in the sixth heaven of Paradiso, in the heaven of Jupiter. And as we have seen the latest couple of cantos, this is a triptych that Dante writes, this 18, 19, and 20, specifically on the topic of divine justice, how just is God and why, and he kind of reflects around this points. But like you say, for Dante, the concept of justice was particularly important, because for somebody so interested in philosophy, theology, etc., he kept reflecting about his own life and biography, and where is God's justice for somebody who's been kicked out of the place he loved? He cannot go back, and he's moving around Italy, let's say, as a lost soul, we could say, from a metaphorical point of view, trying to make sense of his life. And so justice was very, very personally important for Dante. In Paradiso, divine justice is represented by this huge eagle. And the eagle is a formation of lights that all the, let's say, blessed souls of the just leaders, just kings, emperors are forming together. And there is a unison, there is a unanimity in this soul. So this is why the eagle is able to speak with one voice, even if it's within the multiplicity of the different souls, which is one of Dante's great inventions. And he's just finished in Canto 19 to giving us a list of bad rulers, which was a list that was interesting because it was accompanied by an acrostic that, if you read it in Canto 19, it means plague or pestilence. So that's Canto 19. And to confront that is now in Canto 20 going to give us a list of just rulers. To follow, of course, some reflections about divine justice. And like you say, as always, very structured. It's 6 characters that the eagle presents to Dante, 2 of them from the Old Testament, 2 of them from, we could say, Roman Empire, and 2 from the Christian world, or the Christian empire, if we want to call it. So 6 in total. But so historically, I would agree with you that probably the most interesting one is Trajan, and probably for the reasons that the character of Trajan fascinates you, he fascinated Dante so much. We've seen Dante imagine a bas relief in Purgatorio, I think it was Purgatorio Canto 10, where the scene of Trajan with the old widow is represented. One of the most beautiful visual inventions of Purgatorio, from the historic point of view, and from the mythical standpoint, doubtlessly the most interesting, and maybe the most interesting character of the entire canto is this Ripheus. But let's start with Trajan. And can you comment a little bit on the medieval legends? Maybe that would be interesting.
Well, the legends are born from the letters of Pliny the Younger, specifically Book 10 of the letters of Pliny the Younger. I don't think they come from anywhere else. I think they ultimately originate from there. Whether Dante had that particular author in mind, whether or not he even knew Pliny the Younger, he certainly knew the legends, and I think the legends come from there. There's a famous exchange of letters between Pliny, who was, an airheaded lickspittle ladder climber, and Trajan, who was the lord of the whole empire. There's one exchange of letters, a famous exchange of letters about Christians. What do I do with these people? They are gathering and they are talking. What do I do with them? And Trajan basically says, if they're not disturbing the peace, leave them alone. Which, to put it mildly, was a departure from what previous emperors had done and what future emperors would do.
Yeah.
So if you're a Christian and you're reading that, not knowing anything about it, you're going to think that he's going to respond by saying, wipe them out. And he doesn't. He pointedly doesn't do that. And I think that's where it ultimately comes from, whether authors know that or not. That mythology sort of sprung up with, well, we can't consign this guy to eternal damnation. We can't do it. So the myth arose that Pope Gregory the Great resurrected him and converted him, which is really kind of strange. That is a really strange story.
It is strange. Yeah, it is strange.
In that kind of papal pseudo mythology, surely the story could have been that Gregory sanctifies his spirit. Why the intermediary step of physically resurrecting Trajan, so physically bringing him alive again, and then what? You send him to Sunday school? You sit down with him for 3 nights and 3 days and talk to him about Christianity? Then what do you do?
Yeah, it sounds like a decision of some kind of committee, you know? They said, okay, let's do this, but first let's build a committee and discuss the implications for Christian theology. And they overthought the whole matter.
Trajan was a thoroughgoing agnostic. That's the whole reason that he responded to Pliny the way he did. Not because he was particularly beneficent towards Christians, but because he didn't give a rip about faith at all, any faiths at all. So I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for that mythical conversation where he says, well, you know, you were roasting in hell. No, I wasn't. I was just dead. Well, nevertheless, you were roasting in hell, and I want to save you and send you to paradise. But in order to do that, you've got to believe. And then, you know, Pope Gregory talks for the next 2 hours. Trajan was Spanish by descent. There's absolutely no way to make such a person believe something. You have to wait for them to come to it on their own. You cannot make them change their mind about anything. If you can't make them change their mind about a traffic stop, you certainly can't make them change their mind about the nature of reality. So, needless to say, I think that all of that boils into why Trajan was there, why he's there at all.
Yeah,
I think of all the figures, he is the easiest one to explain.
Yeah, and so and this is really the root of all these numerous legends that were circulating in Dante's times around Trajan's life. One of the most famous, probably this legend that Dante already mentioned in Paradiso 10 about the old widow who was. Well, Trajan was preparing for a long journey, maybe a military campaign or whatever it was. And the same morning that he had all of his army ready to go, everybody was ready to go, he decided to delay the entire expedition. Just imagine logistically what it was, because he had to stay for a little bit longer to take care of some business to help this poor old widow who didn't have anybody else helping her. A little bit of a strange legend in itself too, right? Because you wonder where exactly it's coming from.
Yes, it is a strange legend, and obviously has, you know, persistent emotional validation, which is why the exact same legend exists about Julius Caesar and also King Henry II and King William the Conqueror. Exact same legend, just the details change just a little, but the legend persists. It happens over and over and over again. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we went onto the darkest corners of Reddit or wherever, if there isn't such a legend about Ronald Reagan. It's just a popular thing. I think popular probably because it's so flatly impossible on its face. Like you say, the logistics. Trajan would have sacrificed his latest lover, who would have been a boy, in order to keep those logistics moving. So a widow needing help with her taxes or whatever it was, it would never in a million years happen, I think. But it's so appealing, right? It's so appealing to that image of the all-powerful ruler who still has a human heart.
Yes. And to kind of bring it back to at least the Pliny reality, the example you made earlier, he could have, and maybe under a certain logic, he should have told him to just wipe them out, but he didn't. And so it's not too much of a leap of the imagination to guess that there was something real behind these ideas of Trajan as a virtuous man, if not virtuous, at least from a Christian point of view, but a balanced person who
that is definitely true.
Yeah,
there's not nearly as much historical evidence as we would like for Trajan, but that much there is. That is definitely true. A circumspect, just ruler, someone who didn't go crazy.
Yeah.
Didn't commit any enormities of any kind, which I think that's certainly true about Trajan, and raises all the more questions about what David is doing here. What on earth is King David doing there? Where does justice touch on the story of King David at any point? Anywhere. Where does justice touch on him at any point? I have no idea. That I would throw into your court. What medieval legends about David was Dante working on? He couldn't have been working just on the accounts in the Bible. He had to have been going on something else, same as with Trajan.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. So what Dante does at verse 37, he puts David in the pupil of the eye of the eagle. In fact, the entire canto is about the eye of the eagle, right? Because these are the utmost just among all the just rulers and the just leaders. And he says about David, he was the singer of the Holy Spirit who bore the ark from one town to another. Now he has learned the merit will can earn. His song has not been spurred by grace alone, but his own will had urged him on. It's not much. It's not, let's say, it's not enough to really understand the reasons why Dante picked David over some other Old Testament. Thank you, the Bean, for the contribution to the Dante conversation.
What would he have made of her?
And so I honestly don't know, but it's a good point to kind of wonder why, especially knowing what we know about Trajan's reputation. So that's a great point.
Right, it underscores my suspicion that Dante is just hauling these people on and making them mouthpiece for things he wants to say anyway. Surely the ultimate exponent of that is Ripheus, about whom nobody knows anything. He's not anything at all. He's not even a side character. He's nothing. He's a mention. That's all. Surely.
Yeah. So let's talk about Ripheus, because we want to get there. It's he's probably the most important character of the entire canto, and I'm not the only one saying that. I've read some comments and scholars say this is the canto of Ripheus, and when it comes to Paradiso, when it comes to Dante's inventions, because there are many things that people think are Dante's inventions, but they are not, because they come from Augustine, from Thomas, etc. But Ripheus is absolutely a Dante invention in the sense that he sources him from the Aeneid, from Virgil's Aeneid, and he puts him here, very aware of how weird his presence is in this list of just rulers. In fact, so aware that at a certain point, the character of Dante comes out with an outburst, an exclamation, and he says, "Ma di la bocca, che cose son queste?" Che cose son queste is a sentence that you could say even today in Italian, and then Mandelbaum translates as, "Can such things be?" But it's stronger than that. It's more something like WTF.
Yes, you know? What on earth? It's what on earth?
And so, yes, and so Dante really comes out with this outburst, exclamation, say, "This doesn't make any sense. What are you telling me? I believe what you're saying, but it doesn't make any sense to me." So I went to the source, which is, I got my Aeneid.
Oh my, look at that.
Italian and Latin.
Who is the editor?
The editor here is...
who's the translator?
Yeah, RLSPA, and the translator is Anna Giordano Rampioni. She's a Latin literature professor, and he's got both languages, Italian and Latin. And so the second book of Aeneid.
Is she the first woman to do a full-length translation of the Aeneid into Italian?
You know, I don't know. I don't think so. It's the world of ancient Roman text translation in Italy, at least, has always been a very varied one. If I think about my high school texts, maybe, thinking about Italy, you would think they were all men. I remember many female scholars and experts in that. So for anyone who really wants to nerd out, the verse is 425 in the second book of Aeneid. And like you say, Steve, it's the only time in the entire Aeneid, which is a very long poem, a very long poem, that Ripheus is actually mentioned. And Virgil is describing basically all the heroes who are dying outside of Troy because of the assault. And he says, Ripheus died. He was the most just among the Teucres, it's a tribe, and the most respectful of the good, of the ethical good. And then in brackets, Virgil writes, dis aliter visum, which is extremely interesting in my opinion, because it means the gods decided otherwise. The reason why I find it so interesting is that, and this is my personal interpretation, but knowing how much Dante loved Virgil and how much time he had spent just ruminating on the Aeneid and loving the Aeneid and falling in love with Virgil, I wouldn't be surprised if Ripheus is almost like a stand-in for Virgil here. And Dante's love for, we all remember in the Garden of Eden, all the tears that Dante was shedding for Virgil, and he was desperate. He repeated his name 3 times, Virgilio, Virgilio, why do you, well, he disappears, he leaves him by himself. Now, all that emotion is not gone. Dante is still writing, he's still in love with Virgil, and he's still thinking about it. And the reason why this theological doubt has been really eating him up is also because of Virgil. Again, this is my opinion, but I'm open to any type of discussion. But I think that's what's behind this choice of Ripheus. The fact that in the Aeneid, Virgil said in brackets, the gods decided otherwise, it means that potentially Virgil had this foresight to go beyond paganism in Dante's imagination and imagine something beyond that and say, well, I can imagine a divine justice that is better than the pagan gods. Mm. What do you think about this? It's my theory. What do you think about this theory?
Virgil is 100,000 times more steeped in medieval mythology cycles than Trajan is, that's for sure. Virgil the sorcerer. Virgil, the precursor of the Messiah, the 4th Eclogue, where Dante knew all of that backwards and forwards. Virgil was not for him just a classical poet at all. So you're probably entirely right. Ripheus is probably just a sign that Virgil would like to have, Dante would like to have had Virgil with him the whole time. He just knows he can't. Utterly fascinating, but still doesn't explain what David is doing there. But it also doesn't, there's a deeper, I mean, these characters, what they're doing here and why Dante chose these people. That's you asked me what I think stands out, what fascinates me. That's the surface level of what fascinates me. The deeper level of what fascinates me is running all throughout this particular triptych. And that is that I'm wondering what you think of it. You've mentioned it a couple of times in earlier videos, but this strange, persistent floating of the subject by Dante of, you're looking at this figure that I'm showing you, and you, as a good Christian, are automatically assuming they will not be in paradise. How could they be? If they didn't even know about Jesus Christ, how could they be in paradise? And Dante says over and over again, he implies or says, the gods decided otherwise. It's beyond you. You don't understand what's happening here, and you should just accept that. I wonder, I mean, when you're getting to this point, the very eye of the eagle, the most just of most just souls in paradise, surely they should all be Christians. Surely they should be, and they're not. They're very pointedly not.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. What is Dante trying to say there?
Literally at verse 103, the eagle is saying, when these souls left their bodies, they were not Gentiles, as you believe, but Christians, one with firm faith in the feet that suffered one. So there is sometimes, as I was alluding to before, a little bit of a misunderstanding that Dante is just fantasizing and creating. The truth is that in this particular theological point of the salvation of the non-Christians, there is not a lot, really, that Dante is creating, because on the other side, the most interesting point is that not many people are familiar or aware with these theories at the source, which is partially St. Augustine, but mainly St. Thomas. And what's his name? St. Albert the Great, who also talked about this topic. And Dante is taking this type of reasonings from St. Thomas and St. Albert and putting them in Canto 20. St. Thomas in particular put forth the theory of implicit and explicit Christianity or faith, not in the sense that Christianity, the overall rule stands, and this is why also at the end of the canto, Dante goes back, in line, and he says, okay, without Christ there is no salvation. That's the overall rule. But St. Thomas already, and I find this surprising myself in going deeper into it, understanding what St. Thomas wrote about 800 years ago, that Ripheus doesn't matter, not even Trajan matters from a historic point of view. What matters is that Dante is telling us it's the spirit, not the letter. This is at least the way that I'm absorbing this message from Dante. The fact that he's constantly repeating to us, look, yes, we have a set of rules, we have words written down, but it's the spirit of the rule, it's not the letter itself. And that's the way I read it.
Yeah, well, it's the way I read it too, but I find it fascinating. I mean, people would be burned alive in Dante's own beloved Florence just a few centuries later for saying it's the spirit, not the letter. For saying exactly that, they'd be burned alive.
Yes, there's
it just amazes me. It amazes me that all this stuff was so vigorously debated and then simplified, and then luminously simplified.
Yeah, I mean, the burning alive is not great.
Because it's made starker by the fact that you say it's the spirit, not the letter, but the letters here are totally unambiguous. No one comes to the Father but through me. Yes. That seems to be as clear as could be. That seems to say, no matter how nice a guy Trajan was, he's roasting in hell for all eternity.
Yes.
And everybody else with him. And it's a question that still plagues Christianity today.
See, that's exactly
virtuous people who are Buddhists.
That's precisely what I wanted to get to. The fact that it's not a clear-cut, resolved, crystal clear item, and that's what makes it even more fascinating to me. The fact that in looking at some of the literal discussion, the records of the Second Vatican Council, 62, 63, 64, what I found is let's say, every one of the big cardinals who were participating, they had maybe 5 or 10 minutes for their own, to say their own about a specific topic. And on the topic of non-Christian salvation, their opinions differed wildly. And there were still perfectly well-respected Catholic cardinals. They were, so I kind of like that. I like the fact that not always, obviously, especially in time, and not maybe everywhere, but in some occasions, the church has been able to embrace this type of diversity of opinions and get something of value out of that. Because one cardinal was saying, you know, I really don't think this makes sense. We cannot stretch the biblical truth as it is. Somebody else was quoting Thomas again, saying, well, Christ is the mediator. And so as a mediator, he can also be implicitly known by somebody like Ripheus, by somebody like Trajan. And
or King David, when he wasn't having his lovers' husbands killed. What good old just King David.
Yeah, so
still burns me. He gets to be in paradise. It still burns me.
Yeah, that's a hard one. It is a hard one to understand. So anyway, I think it's important to take a little bit away from Dante the inventor, you know, because yes, obviously he was inventing a lot, but and putting back all this content in the theological tradition and the scholarly tradition, because in universities while Dante was writing his Paradiso, there were discussions, arguments. No, it's like exactly about these topics, and it would have been fantastic to have been present to this type of conversations.
Yes, because those discussions were being held on all points by ardent, true Christians. They were having those arguments anyway. The world didn't come to an end. They were having those arguments anyway. And when they were having those arguments anyway, and when it came time for them to go to their little room, their faith was completely pure. It was completely sincere. The arguments were still possible. There's hope for you and me, I guess. We'll be arguing theology and scholasticism until the end of time.
It's an exercise that for I guess the faithful comes from the heart, but it has a lot of intellectual stimulation and
really bothered Dante.
Yes,
it was clearly on his mind, you know. And later than him, the humanists who were studying and loving the works of ancient Greece and Rome, and yet their theology told them that these authors who were meaning all the world to them were being tortured forever, and they couldn't deal with it. They couldn't do it.
Precisely.
Started coming up with a list of good pagans and bad pagans, you know, and also mechanisms for ways that the good pagans could be saved. Implicit salvation is a way that they could be saved. Is it possible?
Yeah. The way I can imagine it is this. I love Dante. I almost consider, you know, somebody who's close, like a friend. And there are many authors as a you know, reader, let's call it, and readers, many people who participate in BookTube. We don't love only the books, but also who's behind the books, even if they're long gone. We love them. There is this emotional connection. This is the magic of literature. But if somebody came to me and say, look, I'm going to tell you, Dante is ending up in hell because he's a heretic and he's suffering forever, I would be very, very disturbed, very bothered by that.
Like you heard about a friend.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's the way I can imagine Dante was feeling about Virgil. And he kept bringing this problem up, maybe not solely for this reason, but it's one of the main reasons why he did that.
I think that's certainly right. That has to be right. It has to be that despite all of the allusions to contemporary history and recent history and scholasticism and St. Thomas, despite all of that scholarly edifice, I think in moments like this in Canto 20, we're looking right into Dante's heart. We're looking right into the man himself, and that I cannot finish this epic without essentially saving some friends without stepping in and saving some friends. I think it's really touching.
Yeah,
really touching.
So it's a testament to friendship that transcends geography and transcends time sometimes as well.
In the South Boston Irish Catholic version, everybody ends up in hell. And if you say even your family, you'd come back with especially them.
Well, it's a testament. Again, speaking about testament of friendship, it's also a testament of how great it is, and it's been always, to talk with you about the Divine Comedy, because I know that you're not faithful, you're an atheist, and but I'm speaking to somebody who can see through a Dante and understand Dante better than many other people who are, in fact, self-professed Christians.
Well, thank you. I'd like to hope so. I know from personal experience that I understand the essence of Christianity better than most Christians I've talked to. That's for sure. Most Christians I talk to just do not see the important things at all in their own faith. Unfortunately, I've known lots that do. But yeah, yeah, I'm not barred from this at all. I fell in love with the Divine Comedy.
Yeah,
as an atheist. So
yeah, that's a great pleasure for me as somebody who is kind of a champion of the Divine Comedy to see, because
kind of a champion, he says. You're a minor advocate of the Divine Comedy.
Yes, yeah. There is so much that sometimes you read obscure publications or maybe even self-published books of people who are not Christian, and they talk about the Divine Comedy having not only made a difference in their life, but having saved their life. Isn't that something absolutely amazing and shocking? Because yes, there are books that can do that. And, you know, this book changed my life, this book saved my life is a bit of a cliche, but I have no doubt that when it comes to Divine Comedy, people mean it. It is something that actually happened. It can happen in your life.
Yeah. I think a lot of people felt the same thing about St. Augustine as well. For the longest time, not the Confessions, rather the City of God, but the same thing. And the City of God and the Divine Comedy are so alike. Mm-hmm. This just gigantic, numerically precise attempt to codify the entire universe.
To contain the universe.
Whole thing. All of it in one book. That's just amazing. Except that Dante remembered the one thing that St. Augustine did not, which is to make it entertaining. So nobody reads the City of God, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, even when
where does this canto leave us?
Well,
you're our guide. You're our Virgil. Where does this canto? This finishes a triptych. So where your viewers? I should say I'm an avid one of your viewers. Your viewers. Where are we poised to go? So
it goes from better to better. We are now closing the kind of turning the page. This is the end of the Heaven of Jupiter. Dante says, okay, I've said what I had to say about divine justice. And in the next canto, we're gonna migrate to the Heaven of Saturn, which is a cold. It's interesting how they saw it as more blue, and therefore in the Middle Ages, they thought it was a colder star or planet, whatever they thought it was, as opposed to Mars, that was warmer. But here at the end of the canto, the eagle kind of has a, how you say, closes its eyelids, and that's its goodbye. This incredible character, because the eagle is one of the main characters of Paradiso. It has an incredible characterization, the movements, the behaviors. Even at the beginning of this canto, we hadn't mentioned, but this gurgling that it does from the neck. The first time I read it, I remember it didn't make any sense to me, but then I read some comments about it, and it's the second time. It's not the first time that the eagle speaks, but Dante thought he would give us the gurgling only the second time, before the second time. and it sounds like a creek of water before all the multiple souls unite to form one single voice. There's not really a univocal answer as to why. Some scholars think it's because, you know, he wanted to give us more drama, more theatrical special effects, you know, which is possible. But it all fits. There's nothing. I still have to find one line in the Divine Comedy that does not have a great purpose structurally and architecturally within.
Oh,
there's nothing.
There is. I heard a friend of mine who was a Dante scholar decades and decades ago said that the gurgling was Dante. Like you say, there's a polyphony of voices that are getting ready to speak in unison. And this friend of mine said, well, that was Dante just reflecting on the sound that an orchestra makes while it's warming up. And I said, yeah, except that he never heard an orchestra. He never heard an orchestra. And my friend was all, oh, are you sure about that? I said, yes, I'm absolutely sure about that. And the wine had been flowing in this room, as you know firsthand. And my friend then got all wounded and said, well, then what's your explanation? And I said, I have an explanation, and it's fairly simple. It's the sound that a hawk makes when you've got one on your hand. Dante obviously experienced that.
Oh,
he obviously
wow.
experienced that. And
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
It's exactly how he describes it. When they're not, they do make a noise. When they're up and they're hunting, they cry, that piercing sound. But when they're on your hand, they do make a noise, but it's not that noise. It's much closer to a gurgling kind of sound, much closer to a throaty kind of rustle.
That is fascinating. I had no idea.
He experienced it himself.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. He's used at least 6 or 7 different hawk-related similes in Paradiso.
I don't know that detail of his biography. I don't know if at this period in his life he knew someone who was of a social status who might have not only hawked for entertainment but also invited him along. I don't know whether or not that happened. I mean, he didn't keep a hawk, I feel fairly certain. Although he had a house, he had servants. He could have kept a small hawk.
Yeah, but it's more. He
wouldn't have been allowed to hunt with it, but he could have kept it as a pet.
Yes, yeah,
enough to know what they were like. There's so much we don't know about what he did every day.
Yes,
that must drive you crazy.
Yes,
there's so much we don't know.
You know, just recently, a famous Italian director, his name is Pupi Avati. He wrote a book and then made a movie out of this book that is going to come out this year in Italy. I don't know the title, but maybe I'm going to add it in the description. And it's a fascinating little story. It's basically the story of Boccaccio, a fictionalized story of Giovanni Boccaccio traveling from Florence to Ravenna after Dante's death to basically on a mission by the Florentines to give something like 10 or 20 golden florins to Dante's daughter, who is now Sister Beatrice, because she's become a nun in Ravenna, almost as a late reparation for what Florence has done to Dante. And now that he is already known as the great poet Dante, because also thanks to Boccaccio, his reputation increased and increased and increased. And he interspersed that, intertwines that with flashbacks from Dante's life while he was writing it's a very beautiful fictional story. And hopefully the movie is going, I haven't seen it, but it's going to come out in a couple of months, and I have high hopes.
No amount of money. Can you imagine, when you think about Dante, when you think about the DNA deep love that he had for one place in the world, and that place says to him, you can never come back here. No amount of money. Oh my God, no amount of money. Imagine it. Imagine all the Florentines, all the thousands and thousands of Florentines who lived, who, if the city had said, get lost, we don't want you back, would have said, good, I don't want to come back. I don't care about this place. They picked the person who loved the city more than anyone and told him, you can't come back. Oh, yes. No wonder he was obsessed with justice. No wonder he was.
Well, I love this. This was actually, we touched on so many different things.
It was my number one fear when you invited me on here. Those of you who are watching, Tom has actually visited here. We know firsthand how long we can go on. I thought we were doomed when our conversation verged onto theology and scholasticism. I thought, there goes the evening. They're going to have a 6-hour video whether they want it or not. But we
made it. We made it.
We'll do a 6-hour video the next time you're over here and just go wherever we want.
This is just how concise an Italian and an Irishman can be. No, doesn't get more concise than this.
Good with concision. But we also don't make boring conversations.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let me thank you again very, very much. This is obviously, first of all, a pleasure for me to share my love for my own Virgil, which is Dante. And hopefully this was also nice to listen to for anybody who's been listening, who's been watching.